Okay, today I'm going to show you a very simple way to do a logo in 60 Premiere software. So if you want to follow along, I'm just going to show some very basics, just highlight some different skills and different ways that you can do things. The first thing you need is an idea of what you want to create. You're going to open up 60 Embroidery, and it'll open up to this screen, 60 Embroidery Extra, when you click on it. Then you want to go down here to this little flower design in the lower left corner. You want 60 Design Creator. We're going to open that up. So this is the module that I use the most when I am digitizing. When you open that up, it's going to come up with a little wizard. You can create an express design. It will auto-digitize something for you. This will trace it. If you look on the little panel over here, it's kind of giving you an idea of what it does. A border is probably going to give you a satin stitch just around something. These are very limited. You can start with these and then modify if you want to. I just prefer to skip those. I like to manually digitize everything, so that way I have more control and I can decide what I want it to look like. So here you're going to have a couple different things, and you need to know if you are going to be working from a background photo, whether you are going to be working from a raster graphic, which tends to have a little bit more grainy edges. You'll see a little more pixelation is what that's called. You'll see the little squares that all the colors are made up of. And those are rasters. The better raster you have, the better, of course. The easier it is to work with. Some people only have poor quality rasters and they make it a little more difficult to work with, but it is doable. So if you have a raster format, you're going to have something that's it doesn't resize as easily, because then you start seeing the pixelation the larger the image gets. You can still use those, however. If you're going to load a raster, then you probably want to load a picture into the paint window. The paint window is for raster graphics. The draw window is for vector graphics. Vector graphics are more scalable. They have nice, much cleaner edges. The formats that are common for vector tend to be .svg, .eps. If you're working in Adobe Illustrator, you've got .ai and .cdr, and for CorelDRAW, things like that. Depending on what program you're using, there are a lot of different formats for vectors. Raster formats tend to use .jpg or .jpeg, .bmp for bitmap, .tiff, .png, which is my favorite for raster. I like PNG. There's a lot of them out there, so you can do some research between raster and vector formats if you like. But if you have a raster format, you're going to want to load a picture into the paint window. Go from there. If you already have a design that you started, you can start with that. This is referring to embroidery design that's in the progress. And this is to start a design with no picture. If you just want to create something just out of your head, this is the option you want to pick here. We're going to load a picture into the paint window today. So view is going to be where you find the folder. So right now it's going to the folder I used last. That's not the folder I want right now. So you can see I have a lot of folders on my computer. These are people I've done things for. Today I'm just going to do a quick one for her. So she's got several pictures. This is the one we're going to choose. Okay, so you'll see this picture is done. She drew it on a marker board, and it's very simple, and she took a photo of it, so we're going to work with that. So it wants to know if we want to rotate the picture. If we do, we can use these little buttons here to turn it, sideways. I'm not, but you can play with that. This is where you crop it. You've got all this excess background, and I don't really need it. I like to crop things down to just a thin margin around the actual design. Okay, next you can either fit the design to hoop. You can tell it I want to fit in the 100mm hoop, and it will automatically size it for that hoop, or you can choose exactly how big you want this. So say your client says you want to have exactly 3 inches from here to here. You can specify that here. You can either type it in inches or millimeters. I have everything set to millimeters because I work best with that. I'm going to be using the hoop today, and we are going to do 100mm standard hoop. So that's the hoop that I want it to fit in. I can always adjust the size later, but this is where I'm going to start. Hit next. It's going to try and refine what colors it thinks it's seeing. So this is the actual photo, and this is the colors that the program believes it sees. Now, if you were auto-digitizing, you want to make sure that you get these colors to be pretty close so that it shows right. You don't want this to look this little blue-gray areas here, things like that. If you were doing the background, or like you can see here where it kind of interpreted this as a darker beige. It's interpreting these lines because it's marker, it's an inconsistent color. So it's interpreting these as multiple shades of this bluish color. For what I'm going to do, because I am manually digitizing, this does not matter to me what colors are showing, as long as all the details are there. If it had cut off something or turned this into something else, then I would be more concerned. You can increase the color numbers, and sometimes that will give you more accuracy. Right now it's doing 10 colors. If I add 20, it actually ended up making that kind of worse. So you can play with it. If I drop it down to 5 colors, that actually improved it this time. So you have to play around with the number of colors that it picks to see what works best. So if I keep reducing these colors, I reduce it down to the most simple of colors, just 2. That's all I need. And that actually turns out really well for the purpose that I have today. You need to decide what's going to be the best working format here. So you want to go with what it looks like over here is how it's going to be on your screen. Hit finish, and that's going to load it into the paint window. Now the paint window has some little tools over here so that you can change colors and draw things and add to the image if you want to actually just do drawing and not embroidery yet. I personally don't use any of these because I do all of my artwork in a program outside of 6D. I use Corel Paint Shop Pro. There are lots of drawing programs out there that work with raster formats. They're a lot more robust. They're a lot more to learn as well. So that's up to you. I personally don't mess with this, but these are drawing tools. You can pick colors and draw things and add shapes and play around with the buttons. Do not be afraid to just get in here and tinker around and see what something does, because if you don't like what it is, you can always hit the undo button and it will undo the last action you did. Or worst case scenario, close out the program and start over from scratch. Don't be afraid to get into your software. If I go over here, I click the Design tab. This is where we're going to work with the embroidery. So you're going to see the hoop, depending on how you have the viewing set up on your page. This area over here is what we'll call the film strip. This will tell us step by step in order what's going to stitch and what shapes, what parts. You're going to see the order take shape over here. This white area here, on my screen it's white right now, but it's within these little corner brackets. This is your stitchable area. The areas out here are not stitchable in the hoop that I have selected. So if you have designs that are flowing outside of this little stitchable area, it's going to tell you it's not going to fit in the hoop. You can either go up here and change the hoop size if you need to make it bigger, or you can, just make sure all your contents are within the stitchable area. But this area right here is the 100 by 100 millimeters that I specified. So we're going to start with that. Now, the next thing you got to do is you got to look at your design. This design is viewable. Right now I have it on kind of a full brightness, for lack of a better word. If you go up here, you can adjust how you see it. This is going to fade it out a little bit, so maybe it's not so obtrusive to your eyes when you're working in the embroidery. This is going to hide it altogether if you click it again. So you can toggle that through all three phases, and you'll be able to see your background image. Now, I have a couple options. Actually, there's a lot of options. When you're digitizing, you'll develop your own personal style. So this one is a very simple image. That's why I picked it. And I want to just go over a couple different ways. If you think about it, the way I like to think about embroidery is this is not picking up a pencil and drawing on paper. You now have the capability of doing something in 3 dimensions. It can have texture to it. It can reflect light off of it in different ways. So you have to think about how it's going to look in 3 dimensions when it stitches out. Do you want it to have lots of nice satin stitches that are going to give you a little more shine, or do you want nice flat fill-in stitches? Do you want a combination? Do you want little running stitches? How fancy do you want it to be? Do you want to stick with just one color? Do you want to do multiple colors? You just think about the end product and the texture that you want it to evoke, the way you want it to bounce the light off when it's under, various forms of lighting. You also need to be aware of what fabric this is going to be on. If this was really skinny letters, it may have trouble being seen if you put it on a real plush fleece, for instance, because those little stitches can get buried inside the fleece because it's so plush. So you can, of course, mitigate that by using a water-soluble stabilizer on top. But it still buries. If you want something that's really eye-catching on a fleece fabric, you're going to want to use a little bit wider strokes, little wider stitches, or a fill-in stitch, or wide satin stitch. But if you want to stay away from probably, your bean stitches, or certainly your running stitches, your single stitches. So you need to be mindful of what fabrics you intend to use your design on the most, because certain types of designs may not be the best for certain types of fabrics. And if you have a client that you're doing this for, they need to be aware, everybody wants the moon, but sometimes that moon is just not possible. So you need to keep that in mind, and you need to understand what works well on what types of projects if you really want optimum outcome. Can you put running stitches on a really plush fleece? Sure you can. It's just not gonna look as noticeable. Okay, so be mindful of that. So that said, there's a few options here. Basically, you're going to look at a couple different things. You're going to look at the pattern fill, which is what fills an area, the inside of an area. And then this is going to be the border of that area. Do you want it to have a satin outline? Do you want it to have a running stitch, a double stitch, a triple stitch, a double with zigzag return, motif line? Maybe you want to pepper it with little stars that outline the outside. There's a lot of motifs. There's a lot of different shapes you can use, a lot of different types of stitches. You can play with all these, or maybe you don't want a border at all. So just to give you an example, I'm going to just pick a basic fill. You can also fill it with motifs. You could fill it with little stars, little hearts, shape fills, radial fills, spiral fills. They're all different ways to fill an area or a region. So you can pick something here. You can always change it later. Now you can put this onto your canvas or your hoop using multiple methods. So you're going to pick the kinds of stitches you want, and then you're going to pick how you want to do it. This is going to read the colors that were in your paint window and do it automatically. This is auto digitizing. So I just click this and watch this. It's going to outline the area that's the region. You can play with it if you think that the edges aren't enough. See, my tolerance is so high now that it's blending all my colors as one and it wants to outline the whole square. That's not what you want. You want to go for the lowest tolerance that includes every object on the screen. Which, because this one was such a simple design, 0% actually works. We're going to hit OK, and it's going to automatically put a pattern fill with a satin line because that's what I had picked. So if you see here this really fine satin line that goes around it, okay. Now, you can go over here to the film strip. You'll see the item shape that we just created. If you right click on that shape and go to properties, it's going to open up another window, and this is how you can edit it. So say I decided I want to do spiral fills. We'll hit apply. You can see how it kind of changed the way things looked. It's kind of funky. You play with it till it looks the way that you want. You know, you have to develop your own style. You can do a satin area. This doesn't always work well. Now you see what it did? It doesn't know how to read these little areas and curves and kind of mix them together. It did some really crazy stuff. It has these little handles on it. If you go over here to the Edit tab, that's going to change the direction that the stitches are going. And you want to pay attention to your stitch directions. So sometimes it'll let you fix these, and sometimes it just wants to be stubborn. Now this is really not a great way to do satin stitching. If you want to do satin area, this works okay for some things, and obviously for some things it doesn't. So if you get this kind of area and you can't get the items to adjust the direction so that it works well with the design. Yeah, see, this one's just not going to work for that. So, but there are ways to do satin that are better than this, okay? I just want you to see that you have to be aware of the shape that you're working with, because not everything works well with different shapes or sizes. You can fill it with a motif. Right now we've got stars. You can go under here and pick all kinds of different categories. Do hearts. So if I do hearts and apply, you see it just filled it in with little hearts. It's not going to look great stitched out, okay, not for this design, but it's an option and you can play with all these all you want. So play with these, and there are lots of ways to customize. So, you know, if I pick this one and I can go here, you can use more motifs. You can play with the spacing. You can play with the angle. So say you want your hearts to go a certain direction. Right now they're all facing up. You can play with the angles by adjusting this. You can adjust how long each running stitch is. Right now it's at 3 millimeters. Maybe you need something that's more fine, and you can adjust that down to 1 milliliter. This line refers to the border line. So this is letting me tell it that I want the border to be 1 millimeter wide and 4 millimeters dense. This is how thick the stitches are together. So say we got 2, and you'll see that instantly made a much more bold line around there. So if you turn no borderline on, you'll see my options changed. Now there's not a line up here, but if I put the line back on, it gives me the option to play with it. If I had, say, a triple stitch line, my options just allow me to choose length, because obviously width is not an option for a triple stitch. Okay, and there are options here to turn this into an applique. So this is going to make it do a double stitch, then stop, and then do a border. Or you can choose it to have a running stitch, then stop, then do a double stitch, then stop, then do a border. So you got like your placement stitch, a tack down stitch, and then your final finishing border, if you choose this one. This is the one that I would choose the most. I tend to not use these because, again, I like to have a little more control. I actually do mine manually, and that way I can control the order that things stitch in a little bit better. But this is an option. If you're just learning how to do this and you want to play with it, it's a little bit more automated. Go ahead and click that, and then it automatically will turn this into an applique. So these are favorites. If the settings that you're using right now are what you want to use as your default settings for every creation that you make, you can play with the favorites options here. These are not my favorites, so I'm not going to mess with that today. So the satin stitch obviously didn't work really well, but there you have a really basic design. Now you'll notice here, the design here, you can see the background there, so it didn't cover the background really well. You'll notice that the outline of this area has a little dip in it. So what you want to do when that happens, if something's not shaping up just right, you have two different options. You have these little nodes that go around. These are what determine the shape. Think of it as connect the dots. Okay, now the option that we picked was this one, and this makes the dots appear automatically, and it only really works on really simple designs that have a pretty good background behind it. Otherwise it will read it kind of funky and it may not turn out as designed. But this is what we use, and it set the points automatically, and it also determined what it thought needed to be round nodes or square nodes. Now here's the difference. A round node is good for curves. It allows it to create curves. Square nodes, if you have a distance between two square nodes, it's going to try and make that as flat as possible. It will force stitching to be done at those exact points. Round nodes are a little bit more approximate and a little more curvy. The way that you change those, after they're already laid and you realize maybe something needed to be changed, go to this Edit tab. So we were on Create. You're going to go to Edit, get on here, and hit Edit Points. You can add more points if you need to, or delete points if you think there are too many points and it's making things chaotic. But you want edit lines for this one, and we're going to go over here and we're going to try and make this into a square node. You're going to hit the Control button, hold it down, and left click. And see, it kind of snapped right to place that way. So right now you have a nice flat stitch with a running stitch border, and you can change the border. Again, go to the object, right click, go to properties, and you can play with all the options. Right now I have a triple stitch. This line, I can also tell it I want that line to have a color change. Maybe I want the outline to be pink. Hit apply and you'll see it show up as pink. Okay? So that is a really, really basic way to digitize something very simple. Okay? If you created an object that you no longer want or you want to redo, you can just go over here, right click, and hit delete. You can also duplicate it if you want to copy it, do things over top of it, things like that. So you can play with it. This is going to give you a very flat looking embroidery though. Like your H and your M, they look like one letter. So there's no design element to it. It's gonna stitch. It'll stitch nice, but it's not gonna be super eye-popping. It doesn't have a lot of texture. There's not a 3D element to it. It's very flat. And this is what you get when you auto-digitize. You get a very flat object. So here's what we're gonna do instead. Okay, and I want to tell you too, if you're gonna do auto-digitizing, if you have something that has a hole, say for instance you're doing the letter O, then you want to use this quick stitch with fill, and it will automatically cut the hole out of the O. If you don't cut the hole out of the O, you'll have a one solid O, like no hole in the middle. Okay? So that's the difference between these two. This one here is freehand tablet fill, and if I just do this, it's going to let me just draw on the screen whatever shape I want, and it is going to fill it in to a shape. So it doesn't work well for drawing just a squiggly line, not this one. This one's going to give you a shape, so it automatically bridged the difference to give me a shape. So say I went to make a little funky shape and match it up. So you can just scribble, you can draw freehand, just really quick. You're not putting points down. That's how that one works. So I just clicked on those and hit delete button, and they deleted. This one here is the one I use the most. Okay, again, you're going to set up what you want for your pattern fill and your line, your outline, if you want to line at all. This one's going to allow you see all the little nodes on there? Well, this one's going to allow you to manually place your nodes. So you're going to click and click and click and left click. And if you want to make a square node, you're going to control and left click, control left click, control left click, control left click. So again, you can shape it. And this is what I use the most. When you're done creating the shape, if this is the shape you want, then you right click on your mouse and it will turn it into stitches. Okay, so you're going to left click, and for the square nodes, you're going to control and left click for anything that you need square, and then you're going to right click when you're done and you'll have a shape. And if you need to edit, say you realize that it's not hitting a certain node very well and you want to make sure it hits that particular node, again, go back to the edit tab, edit the lines, and you can hit control to turn a round node into a square node, or you can just click the square node, left click, and it'll turn back into a round node. Okay, so these are kind of silly things, but as far as the doodles, but you're getting the point that this is how you use this tool. So if you are doing a satin area, satin stitches are really good for anything from about 1 millimeter to maybe about 8 millimeters in width. You can do more than that. I believe with this program, you really can't do less. But you really don't want to go beyond that. If you have an item like this where you want it to still have that satin shine, but it's too odd shaped and too wide, obviously you're not going to have a satin stitch going this wide. That's 25 millimeters. It's almost an inch. That's really wide for a satin stitch, and it's going to make your machine go really slow when it's stitching it out. It could cause a lot of issues. You don't really want things that wide. There is a fill in here under the pattern fill, and you can pick different kinds of fills. So, you can see how the different stitches go. There's all kinds of fills, so you can just play with all of these different kinds. There's tons and tons of them. Pick something you like if you don't want just a nice basic, standard. The default one is number 3, and it stitches pretty nice. It's very standard. If you want to kind of do some crazy stuff and play with textures, this is where it happens. So you can play here. There's a particular fill though. It's number 36. So it's under the standard 3 category. Number 36 is designed to look similar to satin stitching in large areas. It's still pretty broad strokes. It kind of mixes them in, and you can see here on the screen how it does. And that's how it's going to look when it stitches. So this one is a smaller version of it, but it's similar. But this one's the real one that looks more satin type. If you really need a satin look on a big area, 36 is your secret. You can play with these though. I encourage you to stitch all of the different motifs out. Make yourself a little book and you'll know what they look like when they actually stitch, because sometimes what you see on the screen does appear a little bit different when it's in real thread. So you can play with these, but this is an option for big areas if you want a satin type look, but it's too big for a real satin stitch. Okay. you can also consequently, instead of doing a pattern fill, you can pick a satin fill, not in here. So you'll see it's not there, okay? But if you were to, let me delete this, go over here to satin area, set your nodes, right click, it's going to put in satin stitches. Now these are real satin stitches. These are very, very wide, so I don't recommend it for this shape. But when you go over here to the edit tab and edit points, you can change the direction of the stitching a little bit. Well, that one grabbed a node. Change the direction of the stitching, you want to grab the purple handles. And you can see it kind of affects the directions and how it lays. So you can play with that until you find what's best for the shape that you're doing. Okay, what's neat about this one is the satin area, you can still put a border around it. If you right click on the properties, it works just like the fill-in area except it's satin. You can still pick a border. So if I want a satin line border around my satin little bean, there I have it. Okay. This is a really neat option, and I use this a lot too. So I use satin areas and pattern fill areas quite extensively, and these are the same options as up here except that they're satin. This one's going to auto-digitize a region for you. This one's going to auto-digitize a region with a hole, such as the letter 0, letter O, you know, the number 0. This one's going to let you draw freehand on your thing. You just left click and draw away. And this one's going to let you point. And I find that I have a lot more control by clicking points. So this is my personal preference, but you can use what you prefer. And you can also use these with a tablet. If you have a Wacom tablet, you know, to draw with a digital pen, things like that, this program is usable with those. It's a little bit tricky to get used to, but it is usable. So there's that option. Okay, and here are some more options. So you want to play with these. These are continuous column. Continuous column works like this. You have to put a node and go across from it. Put a node and go across from it. So you're making little bridges the width of the design that you want to make. And you have to go back and forth the whole way. And when you're done, you right click and it makes the satin follow the ridges. And you can do all kinds of fun shapes with these. This is continuous column. If you have a tapered look, you know, where it gets skinnier, you want a satin stitch, but it's skinnier to wider. And then maybe it tapers back down a little. You want to get your nodes real close. And if you click too close, it just grabs the node that you already laid that's closest to you. So sometimes if you're putting something real close, I click out further and then I drag it till it's in the spot I want, because otherwise it grabs the wrong ones. So that's how you can do something that's tapered. If you don't need something that's tapered, you can simply go over here and pick the running, the line, and just pick the satin line and go pick this one. Okay, if it has this little pen needle looking object, this means it's freehand drawing. Okay, this is auto digitizing. If it has this little flowery star looking thing on it, auto digitize, it's going to do it for you. These little things with these little tiny points, these little nodes, anytime you see those on an icon, it means you get to plot the points yourself. Okay, so I like to pick the satin line. I'm going to plot the point myself. Okay, this one I don't get to set the width this way. I can't do tapers. This one's going to give me a line that is even on the width all the way across. It's very uniform. And it ends, you know, with flat ends. So you can do that. See, this one ended up kind of square. So if you're trying to do like an S or something, sometimes you gotta move your nodes. Play with them till the shape is right. Okay? But it's very flat. You can change the width of it you're going to go to the satin line, and it's going to ask for the width and the density. You can play with both of those. I find the default density of 4 usually is pretty good, but sometimes I need to alter that. Say I want this to be a 3mm wide. There you see it made a nice thick one. But you can tell here that this is even all the way around, but you can't taper the ends on these. Okay? So be aware of that when you're using this line here instead. So these are all your digitizing, your drawing tools, so to speak. Different ways to use the same tools. These are different methods to draw a line, and you can pick what kind of line. Different methods to draw a satin area, you know, like a whole region that fills in. Different methods to draw a filled in region, and you can pick the patterns, and you can pick, you know, if you want a border outline on something. So these are kind of what you play with. But think about texture, because this auto digitizing function is very flat, and yes, it does accomplish what you need. It does create the picture, but it's very flat. The continuous column, you have to go back and forth, and you lay the width of each one, but it's going to allow you to taper things. There's feathered satin, which is kind of unique. So again, you're going to go back and forth, just like the other columns. But that's going to feather it. It's going to vary the length. So you got longs and shorts on the edges. And if you right click on this, you can pick, say you only want to feather one side of it. Right now I have it feathering both sides, so both this side and that side are feathered. If I pick just one side, it's going to make it even with the line there, and it feathers outside the line on just side A. Or I can flip that, and I can do that on side B. And you can determine how long you want the stitches to be and how dense. You know, if I want this to be 15 is not real dense. If I do 8, it's going to make it more dense. You'll see how it filled in a little bit more. So you can play with those. This is Richelieu bars. I have not created anything yet that uses those, but it creates these little satin bars that go like this. And motifs, of course. So anything that's under the continuous column, you're going to have to go back and forth, side to side to draw it. But it's going to fit everything into the lines that you make within the width that you drew. But you've got to set the width all the way along. So it doesn't have to be a lot. If you want a constant width, you can just do 4, you know, and it'll get you across. Okay, so I'm making a huge mess on here. Just to show you some of the fun tools, there are tracing options. Here's shapes. So if you want a fill-in shape or a line shape, you're going to pick the shape you want first, some basic shapes. Say you want a heart. Sometimes I found that these don't stitch out very well. You pick your shape, and then you pick if you want it to be fill or line. So I picked fill, and it's automatically there, and then you can resize it once it's here. You can resize these as much as you want. If I have it on heart and I click that button, of course, then I'm just going to get the outline version. Okay, and you can modify these. You can play with the nodes, but it's just giving you a basic shape to play with. And again, when you're into something, you can always go right-click on the film strip, object, go to properties, and you can play with all of these different things, and you can play with the different kinds of fill types. You know, maybe you want some funky diamonds in your heart, you know. So play with textures, because it's really, really fun. Okay, now that you have had a chance to just play with some of these tools, let me show you one more thing. Say you don't want to draw a line, but you want it to be indented because it is 3-dimensional. You can emboss, and you can just draw freehand, or you can place nodes. Embossing is going to kind of make little indent lines and it works better on some stitch types than others in certain directions depending on what direction the stitches are going. Sometimes they show up better than others. So you saw I did 3 different ones and only that one really showed for some reason. But that's embossing. It makes it indented. So it's going to indent the area where the stitches are. Okay, so you can play with those. So those are your basic tools. If you want to add a color change, you can move things too. Say I want this heart to stitch out last. I'm going to move it to the very end, or move it to after whatever I want it to stitch after. Say I wanted that heart to be a different color. The way I do this is I right click the one before the last one of the blue color and before the one I want that's pink. I right click on that one, insert color change, and I'll pick a color. And you can go through here and pick colors. This is just kind of approximate colors. You can go through here, pick a specific color. When you get your color, you can also pick if you want different thread types. We'll go over that a different subject. I didn't pick my color, obviously. So I meant to, clicking too many times. Okay, so there you have pink for that heart. This one, I want it to be pink too. Let's move it down the line. Pink, okay? The other way to do a color change is you can go over here and just click color change, and it's going to stick it right after whatever is highlighted in the film strip. So everything after that was purple until it got to the other color change. So you can add color changes that way as well. You can do single stitches. If you just need one little tiny stitch, maybe it's just not filling very good somewhere, you just need to add a little stitch, you can add little stitches. If you are going to be splitting the design, you want to add alignment stitches or things like that, maybe around the corners of your designs. There are lots of options to play with, and I don't want to overwhelm you too much, but I just wanted to show you some basics. I'm going to go ahead and highlight all of these and delete them. So we're back to our original design. Now you'll remember that the auto digitizing was this one, and we did that, and it looked nice, but it was very flat. I personally would either play with the satin point areas or go over here to continuous column, and you'll want to play with these to see which one works best. There's a lot of kind of tapering involved, and that's why I don't think going with the satin line is going to be the best option for this. But what I want to do, I envision that these are kind of intertwined. That maybe one was written over top of the other. Maybe you wrote the H first and the M second. And I want it to look like that. I want to think about how the strokes are when the person wrote this letter. So assuming they wrote the H first, I'm going to go ahead and digitize the H first, the legs of the H anyways, and then I'm going to cross over top of it with this. So that way you get some layering effect. And I am going to go ahead, we'll try it with a satin area first. So we are just going to plot points. Now you can have the auto digitizer do this, but the auto digitizer is going to turn this all into one object, one flat object. And that's not what I want. Wait, hold on, I started with the wrong area. I am going to plot around the H's. Okay, and the long stretches that are kind of flat outlines, you don't have to have as many points. But when you get around little corners that are a little bit more nuanced, you want to put more points then. Does that make sense? Anytime you get a little curve or where it indents just a tiny bit, if you want to capture that, you want to put some nodes there. And that'll give you some ability to fine-tune it. Okay, so I have one stroke down and I'm going to right click. So then I can go over here and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to left click some big areas. So, and the more you play with this, the more familiar you're going to get, the more you're going to realize what order you should do things, you know, and you can always move the orders in the film strip area. But it shouldn't really be that difficult. It's just time consuming. This particular design is really, really simple, but I have done designs that have taken me nearly a month. So it really depends on the design and what you're doing. So right now I've got the two legs of the H and I want my M to overlap it. So I'm going to go ahead and start over here. .60 does a really good job of fixing, you know, when you first plot something, it's going to look funny, but it irons it out kind of, you know, it just kind of flows with you as you go to the next point. All right, when you get to a sharp corner, you definitely need a square node. Sometimes you need them more often, but definitely on sharp points, you're going to want square nodes. So kind of pay attention to where I'm putting my squares. I tend to put nodes closer together on areas where I know that there's a lot of change coming up in direction, certain curves. So you can play with it till it looks right, you know, and you can always adjust those on the Edit tab. This is pretty straight, I think. Yep. So we'll just go with a couple of squares. Get into my curves. Okay, so you can see this, but you'll notice with the satins that they are really, really tricky. Anytime you're doing satin stuff, it's really tricky. If you look really close here, let me see if I can zoom in here for you. And hold on. There we go. What you're seeing here is the direction of the stitching, which is really great. It's going nice angular here, nice angular here. There's kind of a little problem here though. You're going from really short stitches, and in order to fill in this big M, you've got these really long stitches and they're really on top of each other in order to get it filled in. So this is going to create kind of a buildup of threads here that may be a little bit tough. You know, it may have a hard time stitching, and you've got the same issue here with this. You've got a tight inner corner and it's fanning out to a big outer corner, and that's going to cause some stitching issues possibly. The other thing you want to be aware of is the length of the satin stitches. Right now you've got satin stitch here going from here to here, and if I drag my little measuring tool, it says it's 13 millimeters long. That's really long for a satin stitch, and that can be problematic. I'm not saying that you can't try it. If you slow down your machine, it's going to slow itself down. But I don't recommend anything. And this one here is especially long. To get that satin stitch from here to here is 19.9 millimeters. That's almost an inch. So you'll notice when you're doing things like this, you might have to backtrack and go, okay, well, this worked good. I liked how the legs of the H came out. And I really like how this draped across that H. So you see the shadow and the variation, you know, you see the layering. So you're getting some 3D depth here. It's not flat. So you're on the right track. But then you get to things like this and you realize, okay, that's not the best. It may not work. So you're back to the drawing board. So if you think about this, you go, well, maybe I can break this up into different columns. Maybe I can break, you know, do a leg here and then make this a separate object and make it stop a certain area, you know, so that it doesn't have these really long stitches here. So if I break this up into, let's say, 1, 2, 3, 4 different legs, maybe that'll work. So sometimes you have to redo them. So if I go back there, I'm going to delete that M again. And I am going to think about this for a second. I think if I were drawing the M, I would kind of want this one, and I would want this in the background. I would want it underneath that one. So I'll do this one first, but I have to keep in mind where this leg is going to overlay. So this one I want it to overlap some, but not take over this whole thing because I want to avoid that little buildup. So I have to think about which way I want things to layer. I want this underneath, I want this on top, and that one on top. Do I want this one on top of this one, or do I want it underneath? And you can play with that. So let's begin again. So I hope I'm not swamping you guys. I'm kind of going through some theory with you as far as like how to get things to look more three-dimensional, so you don't look like the flat digitizers that are auto-digitizing. Again, this is really basic, and it's going to take a while to master and develop your own thing. Now, here where it matches, do I want to cut it off here and turn this into a leg here all the way and just end this leg here, or do I want to take it up to the top and make the other one go behind it? So you got to think about how you want it to look. I want it to go all the way up to the top. I want it to be one nice broad stroke from top to bottom. So, and again, you kind of put your nodes a little sparse, and if you end up needing more nodes later, you can go to the Edit tab and add those. So here's my first leg. That should be fine. There's no buildup or anything like that. This leg I want to be underneath. I want it to be underneath this one and that one, just because that's the way I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and go underneath. So it's going to build up there. Okay. Go back to my continuous satin. So I am going to start here. Remember, you are building left and rights if you're doing continuous satins. You could stay with the satin areas too. It really doesn't matter. It's a matter of preference. But I think this is going to be a little bit easier for me to control how it stitches. So I am getting to the point now where that's about as wide as I want it. But I want just a little overlap. I want it to overhang into the area that's going to be covering it. So I brought it down a little bit past this borderline and brought it into it. So you can see how it's overlapped. And this one, you can see I also underlapped it under this one. You want a little bit of overlap to accommodate, any shifting in fabric. You don't want a lot of overlap, but you do need some. I just find that it's more foolproof when you're stitching. Okay, so there's that, and I'm going to come back here. I'm going to do continuous column again. I could stick with the satin area. It really doesn't matter. Now, if you look over here, you should also take note of on each item, there's a red and a green dot, and you can see them when you highlight them too. But over here you can see, okay, so up here near the top is where it's going to start stitching. It's also where it ends stitching. Start stitching, end stitching, both on the top. This column here I just made, it starts stitching up here, and the red dot is on the bottom, so it's going to stop stitching here. So if you want to make it a little easier for the stitching and jump stitches, if you're mindful of where you start and stop, you can start your next one in a roughly the same area, and maybe you can eliminate some of your jump stitches. So what I want to be mindful of here is the width that I want this, and I envision that the width of this little thing here goes out to there. So I'm going to do a continuous column, and I'm starting small and I'm graduating up because it's kind of rounded. Now I'm going to make sure that the nodes I place on that side are in line with here, where it's going to meet up. See how I did that? So they're overlapping. Okay, now again, before I finish this, I have to decide, do I want to take this all the way to the top and have this come down the other way, or what's going to be the best way? Do I want to have this all the way to the top and this one underlap? So I have to think about how I want that. I think I want to finish off with this being on top, so it's just a matter of preference. So what I want to do is bring this so it's going to underlap this imaginary separation line here, because you want a little bit of overlap. But you need to bring it up to the point that it's going to fully cover here. So now I can adjust as necessary. Okay, now you can see how it overlapped, and you get kind of a neat artistic effect when you do that. You can play with the shapes. I'm just doing this very quick. I'm very meticulous when I'm really doing this. But you can see how to digitize. This is your basics. So you do need to know the difference. If you're using the continuous columns and you right click, you cannot add a border around those. You can change it between satin, feathered satin, the Richelieu bars, or the tapered motifs, but you cannot add a border automatically to them. If you want a border on this now, you're going to have to manually go around and plot a border stitch around anything that's a continuous column. The advantage of the satin areas, I think they offer a little less control. You can still tweak them though, and you can still play with the directions, and you may want to. You may want to make this more uniform, make sure that all your stitches are horizontal, for instance. You can go through on the Edit tab and adjust all the little purple directional bars. But what you really want to do, if you have a satin area, you can then go into Properties. Here's the big difference. You can choose. If you want to switch it to a fill-in line, you can. If you want to flatten something out. So there's more edit options. I'll go back to satin, and then you can pick your border line. I like to border my satins with a nice triple stitch. So you can go through and do that. Okay. The other thing you can be mindful of, if it's a big area that you're overlapping, you may want to do this in 2 sections so that you have this area and then you stop so that you can make a gap here to remove the overlap, because you don't want too much buildup when you're stitching. And then you'll do a second line and do that here, and that way you have gap here. You want a little bit of overlap to help accommodate any compensation issues, if your fabric gets pulled in from the stitching, which is very common in satin stitching especially. Or if your fabric shifts a little bit, you want a little wiggle room because you're going to work on knit fabric, for instance. Those things are kind of notorious for shifting a little bit. A little bit of overlap I find is very helpful. Makes the stitch a little bit better. But if you have a lot of overlap, it creates a lot of excess unnecessary bulk. Like here, I could probably lessen that bulk a little bit by ending this upper column here and starting a second column here. But that way I leave a little bit of gap in between the 2 columns underneath, and you won't be able to tell that. You won't see that the gap is there because the stitching from the M is going across it, but it will help reduce bulk. So you need to think in terms of 3 dimensions, how it's going to look when it stitches out, things like that. Determine if you're going to want to be able to add a border line, and if you want to add it a different color even, let's do a satin, and we'll insert color change. Go to the line and you can pick the colors. Maybe we want to do just different colors. So you can play with it like that. If you have a standard font you want to add, you can go up here and drop them in by one letter at a time. So, I don't know, say you want to add a D, you got an uppercase and a lowercase. You can choose what you want. Choose your size. Choose what category the font is from. Now, for these to be effective, I don't really like this in 60. You can't see what they look like in Design Creator. It's easier sometimes to export this embroidery as is and then go do all the lettering in 60 Extra via the letter tab, because then you can see the fonts. You'll see what they look like and it will line them up for you. Here you are working with individual letters and it's a little weird and clunky. It's not the best tool, but you can do them in here. So if I want a Georgia 20mm high letter D, I can insert it. Sometimes it does funny things like that. So then you just have to go back and correct it. It's not a big deal. So if I do a D and an O, you're going to see it puts them next to each other, but it doesn't come in as a whole letter. It comes in as all these little tiny pieces that it took to digitize. So when you're moving these letters, you need to be aware of that. When you have all your letters down here, then you come over to the Edit tab. I find my favorite way to work with it is to draw a box, a selection box, by left-clicking and dragging around the letter, and then I can move that letter wherever I want. And same thing with that, but the problem is sometimes if it's over top of another object, sometimes you end up getting stitches that you don't want. So there's that. All of these kind of came in and they were not wanted there, so I'm going to move these to the bottom to get my colors back the way they should be. So when you're done with your embroidery, well, okay, before you're done, all along the way, you need to be doing save as, and this is going to save it as a .edo file, a .edo, and this is your working file. It's going to save all the pieces and parts and film strips, so you can come back and edit to your heart's content. You can resize things all you want. Okay, if you want it bigger, at that point you just want to turn off your background because it's no longer applicable. If you're going to resize something a drastic amount, it's best to do it here. So highlight everything you want to resize with the selection tool, draw a box around it. If you got things close together and the box won't work to grab just a part of it, you can draw around it. So say I just wanted to only increase the size of the D and the O, and I want to be careful not to select the H and M. I can draw around it with that one and then resize as necessary. So you find in Design Creator, because you're working with pieces and parts, you can resize and edit to your heart's content. I love Design Creator. There's a lot of flexibility with it, so you can do all that. Save often as a .edo because it will save all these pieces and parts, and that way you can come back and edit them later on. You'll have full functionality to continue to play with it. Even though the .edo is not what you send to your machine to stitch, it's a file that's exclusive to the 60 Premiere program, and you really won't use it in anything except for 60 Premiere. However, it is what you need if you want to do full digitizing and full editing capabilities. So save your .edos. When you're done with it and you're satisfied, you're like, okay, I really like this design. It's beautiful. Okay, this one's not, but you know what I'm saying. Okay, when you get it the way that you want it and you are ready to stitch it out, go to File, Export Embroidery. Okay, this one's going to tell me is too large or will not fit in the hoop because I have it outside the stitch area. Remember that. So I can either go ahead and make it smaller, or I can go up here and change my hoop. I don't know why it matters, but I guess it's just a safety check to let you know that it's not going to fit in the hoop you think it's going to fit in. So pick a bigger hoop. Hey, looky, it's inside the borders. We're okay. So now it'll let me. We'll export. You can pick what format you need up here. If you are making something for a brother machine and you want to use .pes, you can pick that. So the options change a little bit depending on what type of file you're saving as. VP3 is here. These are options you can pick. Color sorting can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing. It depends. If you're making something like freestanding lace or applique, you don't necessarily want to always do a color sort because it might merge things and remove color stops that you don't want to lose, because you need it to stop in order for you to trim your applique in between steps. So you need to be aware of what these do and what you want on. Personally, I'm very careful with how I digitize, and I do not like anything automatically done to my designs. I'm picky like that. So I take them all off on most things, but not on everything. So you'll save it, you'll name it whatever you want. It's going to probably have a default setting of my designs in my documents folder. You can change that to whatever you want. I save a lot of things to my desktop. So my desktop is a total mess, and I'm sorry for that. But if you go back out here, you'll see all my working stuff. Here's my new VP3 file, and you can see what it looks like. Okay, ignore the fact that it's totally funky because I was just doing it to show you guys. I would never really sell one like this. Or use one or stitch it. Okay, but this is what you have. So if you double click on it, there's your thing. You can see here that it did not combine my letters, my colors, because I told it not to. It is separating this color out because I had it automatically add this outline, and that's great for ease of use, but I hate it because then it usually puts it in some odd place where you really don't want a color change. That could have waited till after the M. Or maybe not. Maybe it couldn't because it's underneath the M. So you actually do need that color separation. So you need to be very mindful of what order, because if I move this on top, it's going to go over top the M. You can move the color order on things. If you go to the Edit tab, watch this, I'll take that, I'll move it down a layer, go back to the Home tab, and you'll see what it did. See, it put that border right over the M. It's totally silly. It doesn't work. It's not in good order anymore. So you really need to be careful of what order things are in your colors, but always double check, because when you export things out and it converts it to a .vp3 or anything else, it's going to make some decisions in the program of what it thinks you need, and you always want to double check that it did it right. Now, because I didn't pick to combine and color sort when I exported it, it didn't do that. And as you can see, I have the D and the O, they're the exact same color, but it has two separate color blocks for it. I don't really need that. You can then go into color sort, and it should combine those. So, but double check that everything is as good as it says it is, that it's exactly the way you want it to stitch. It looks the way you want it to be. It's in the order you want it to be. It's in the size you want it to be. And once you've verified all that on your .vp3 file, hit save. Then you can go ahead and put it on your machine.